Hello, I'm Ian Scott. Father Lee wrote 21 books. The 4 he wrote on Wagner are perhaps his most famous. Wagner, the Terrible Man and His Truthful Art. Wagner and the Wonder of Art, Father Lee's analysis of Die Meistersinger. Wagner and the Greeks, Athena Sings. And perhaps his most famous book on Wagner, The Ring Cycle, Turning the Sky Round. In addition, he wrote about opera in general. He gathered 21 of his first intermissions from the Metropolitan Opera, the texts of those, into a volume called First Intermissions. He gathered his articles for the San Francisco opera program and articles for opera news and whatever into another volume called A Season of Opera from Orpheus to Ariadne, and then a third volume about 100 different opera plots. In addition to operas, he also wrote a book about instrumental works. And this book of instrumental works is interesting, to me at least, because there are a couple of Naxos DVDs or CDs as part of the book. As a writer about Latin poets and poetry, his word, sound, and image in the poetry of Horace is a study of Horace's odes, and the 3 great poems of Virgil, the Eclogues, Death and Rebirth in Virgil's Acadia, on the Georgics, Virgil as Orpheus, a study of the Georgics, and his study of Virgil's Aeneid, Fathers and Sons in Virgil's Aeneid, another of his classical output. Now, in this video, in these interviews, none of these are talked about, or perhaps only in passing. He talks about his interest in movies, in his books on movies, and his personal memoir, and his book of his own poetry. So here is Father Lee as the author, Father Lee. So people have often asked me, are you still writing books?
Not anymore, Ian. I think I've pretty well covered the ground with classics, opera, movies, poetry, and personal memoir. But they still let me preach sermons here where I live, and I have privately had printed up a couple of volumes of sermons.
How many of the intermission features are in the public domain now?
I think they've all been in print in some way or other, most of them in my volumes, First Intermissions and A Season of Opera. Others have been scattered around in various opera magazines. But there's one on Yennefer that still awaits publication. I sent it somewhere, but they weren't interested. Beyond any question, Wagner's Ring, Turning the Sky Round, it has sold more copies than all the rest of the books put together. You know, in 1967, everyone had a centennial project, everyone in Canada. And I thought my centennial project was going to be to write a poem every day, all summer long, to prove to myself whether I was or wasn't a poet. And every day, all summer long, I wrote a poem, whether it was 200 lines or 2 lines. And I think by the end of the summer, I proved to myself that I wasn't a poet. But when I reached the ripe old age of 79, I thought I might gather some of the poems together, especially the ones when I remembered traveling in Europe for the first time at some of the famous places. And here are a couple of those poems. The first one I wrote when I first went to Lourdes, and it's called Conversion. On the evening of the feast, I came where pilgrims come, passed with my candle through the river's mist, my Ave only one in thousands sung. I saw the stricken swaying on their beds and glanced away from their imploring, fevered eyes. I pleaded too, who there did not need healing. I too knelt at the spot and found myself professional, dissembling, strangely humbled, naked, wanting, with only unseen arms to stay my trembling. And later in Europe, I went to school at the American School of Classical Studies, and I sat there doodling with the meters used by the Greek and Latin poets, the anapes and spondies and dactyls and iambs and trochees, and the final elusive choriamb that became the dithyramb. And here's what I wrote about them. A depressed anapest couldn't strike up with the rest, and 3 despondent spondees plopped down, dropped down. Seems that dactyls were winning the day with their lingering fingering, pushing the rest of the feet off the page until some iambs, born with rhyming with other iambs, found 7 pokey trochees who were seated on the ground, and the sound they made bounding around was a brisk choriamb. Skip like a lamb, don't give a damn, just as I am, make dithyramb. I read one more because it's a movie everybody knows. Number 2 on my list from the best year Hollywood ever had is The Wizard of Oz. Number 1 had to be Gone with the Wind. The Wizard of Oz by Victor Fleming, an American fairy tale and a movie legend. It did not clear its costs in 1939, but in subsequent years, generations of TV watching children have taken to it and learned it by heart. Heart is the word for Judy Garland's performance, and it is hard to imagine how Ray Bolger, Jack Haley, Burt Lahr, Frank Morgan, Billy Burke, and Margaret Hamilton could ever have been bettered, though most of them were not MGM's first choices for their fantasy roles. Judy's poignant Over the Rainbow by Harold Arlen and Yip Harburg was selected Song of the Century in a survey taken in 2000 by the Recording Industry of America and the National Endowment for the Arts, though the MGM front office at first ordered it cut from the picture. How could they have been so brainless, heartless, and cowardly? The year I taught in Rome, I taught mostly American students in English on the campus of Loyola University of Chicago, Rome campus. And I think more than 10 years later, I wrote a book about it, and it took me more than 10 more years to get that book in print, because I suppose it was about 3 things. It was my going through a kind of midlife crisis and about religion, and it was about teaching Greek and Latin to very intelligent students whom I learned to love, And finally, it was about what else? What else is there? Opera. Going to operas. I've got a preface to the book, and I think the best way to describe it is simply to read this. Much happened during the year I taught in Rome that is not recorded here, and some of what is here has been transferred from other years spent teaching in other places. There is not a character in this book, apart from the narrator, who is not an amalgam of two or more people the narrator once knew. That much said, this is a true story of a century now past. Like most Baroque churches, this one is astonishingly small within. There are pews, and we who've come to hear the lecture gratefully fall into them, and there is silence. Manfred Schöne invites us to sit for a few minutes and let the architecture work on us. 15 whole minutes pass. No one speaks. Hardly anyone stirs, until curiosity about the dome leads us one by one to rise and walk beneath it and stare upwards. White and gold, it seems much higher than its exterior suggested, and there is a delicacy, a truly ethereal quality about it that is altogether different from the massive semi-globe we had seen at the Pantheon. This dome is not rounded within. It is, at its base, a hexagonal shape in which 3 of the sides curve into concave semicircles, and the other 3, alternating with the semicircles, have been shaped into convex, truncated bays. The 6 sides lift gracefully, adorned with stars, to form at their top extremities a circle, surrounded by 6 winged cherubs. 6 large windows around the base of the dome let in the light of Roman midday, so that the dome seems to be floating in air. Through its circle, we look up into the lantern to a dim, angelic vision at the very top. Then our eyes move down along the walls, which are interrupted by corners and curves, formed by contrasting angles and arcs. While the dome is peaceful, the walls seem restive and troubled. No one pays any attention at all to the floor, but that is where Schöne, when he breaks his silence, directs our eyes. The floor is a hexagon formed by 2 equilateral triangles superimposed and shaped like a stylized B. From this foundation, meant to indicate the heraldic symbol of the Barberini family, whose famous son, Urban VIII, commissioned the church, the walls rise and struggle, concave facing convex across the church, and finally soar to support the dome, which at its base is another stylized B, and at its top a circle that reveals a distant vision. The demonstration of technical skill by Borromini in supporting the weight of the dome on such an intricate series of geometric rhythms is, in its way, as impressive as that accomplished 15 centuries earlier in the Pantheon. With all those centuries between, they seem in the little church to come together. Classic architecture is fused with Gothic in extraordinary bursts of Baroque energies. Schöne remarks that Borromini drew some of his inspiration from the ruins of Hadrian's villa, and you could swear he knew about Notre Dame in Paris as well. But the impression is nonetheless completely Italian. Rome in a small space. As the eyes travel upward from the floor to the suspended dome, the walls seem almost alive, so dynamic is the execution. But the overall feeling is, for all the physical energy, intensely spiritual. That is to say, we are led upward through a series of powerful struggles, and we come to rest in a perfect circle through which, with upturned faces, we glimpse a vision altogether peaceful of divine protection.